Welcome to the Providence College Podcast. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Email podcast@providence.edu with questions or comments. Go Friars!
Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum. This episode is a rebroadcast of our previous conversation with Doris Burke. We're re-releasing this podcast because she's been in the news recently. She did a phenomenal job of covering the NBA Finals. Her work there was lauded throughout the industry. She was recently elected to the Providence College Board of Trustees, and she was named Woman of the Year by WiseWorks, a leading voice and resource for professional women in the business of sports. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Providence College Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum. I'm here with our PC videographer and producer, Chris Judge, class of 05. As a major gift officer here at Providence College, I'm fortunate to meet with hundreds of people within the Friar family, and I'm excited to tell some of their interesting stories and share them with you. And today we have class of 1987, Doris Burke. Thank you for joining us. Doris is one of the most well-known Friars with her work at ESPN, with the NBA, WNBA, and women's college basketball. Doris, thank you for joining us, and thank you for welcoming us into your home. This is great.
My pleasure. I thought you were going to make me younger at the start of the interview. I was going to be so excited.
If you have any eligibility left, I'm sure we would welcome you back on campus.
Not only do I not have any eligibility left, I don't have any skill left at my age. So.
Oh, that's hard to believe. And you must be taking people down in men's and women's leagues around the country as you're traveling.
It's so funny. The closest I get to playing now is, and I don't know if you saw the video, but and I don't remember if it was in the playoffs or just down the stretch of the Golden State Warriors, but I had this ball come flying at me, and my cameraman caught me catching it and putting it behind my back, and then Mark Jackson did his Mark Jackson thing, and it kind of blew up. That's as close to skill as I get anymore.
Well, you're right. That did blow up. I saw that. I think everyone in the PC community who's on Twitter retweeted that GIF. I think Mark made a mention of in high heels, Doris Burke, behind the back.
He's too funny. As long as he didn't give me the hand down, man down in that instance.
Well, as long as your cameraman didn't fall, I think we're all set with that. But at the same time, that kind of goes right into your role at PC as a famous point guard for the Friars in the late 80s. For you, obviously, athletics has been a big part of your life. It's continued on for your career. Would you say that participating in athletics is a vital part of higher ed, either at PC or at any college, for a potential student athlete?
It's interesting, and I was part of a panel for the Big East transition game this past Saturday, and I happened to get there early enough to watch the three other panels that went before me, and the same message just kept repeating itself to these Big East women's basketball players from across the league. And the message was for, regardless of what you're going to do in life, there's one constant, and that's hard work. And I think Providence College, being part of the basketball program there, it just taught me that you have to first and foremost work hard. And then the other part you have to be willing to do is work with a group of people and pull in the same direction as that particular group. And those are two skills that are incredibly valuable. And I'm incredibly thankful to Providence College. I learned many things outside of the classroom, many things inside of the classroom. I still consider the place family, and it was pretty cool to be with a group of Big East athletes who I was thinking about when I was prepping for that Big East transition game. I was thinking that right now it would be 30 years ago September that I would have been entering my senior year at Providence College.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when you think back to that time for prepping for your senior year, do you feel like taking that leadership role that you take within the team, that sort of, whether you're a captain by name or you kind of take on that mantle of being a captain, I think that's affected you professionally after college?
I don't know necessarily being named captain had an influence. Obviously basketball was incredibly important to me back then, and we were fortunate to have some level of success, but we were fortunate to have an incredibly talented group of people. And so I don't know, I think one thing Providence College, I recollect hearing at some point, and I don't remember what class or where, but it basically, somewhere at Providence, someone said to me, leadership is service, right? Like, that's the definition of leadership. It's not sort of being in the forefront of everybody's mind. It's what are you doing for the group? How are you helping the particular group you're working with? So I don't know. I think one thing people would marvel at in the business I'm in, Matt, is, and the viewer would never have any idea of this, but I couldn't tell you the number of people on a broadcast team that it takes for that broadcast to be successful. We're talking about cameramen who I think are the brilliance of television. They capture the images that all of us remember as sports fans. There's technical people, there's graphics people, producer, director. So you figure out pretty quick that the people beside you, behind you, and in the truck are as important to what you're doing to a show's success.
Right. I can imagine that being the case. And you coming from a team sport background, you know what is the importance of every person and the role that they play, whether they're the star or what have you. And sometimes people being on the scout team can be just as influential for a team as opposed to, a sixth man or woman or a star or what have you, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think obviously, and there's no way, like if we do our job right, Matt, the viewer is never going to know that it takes that many people to do a really good job. And that's the way it should be. But I've always been incredibly grateful to have been around incredibly talented colleagues. You think about some of the people I've called games with: Dave O'Brien, who's now the voice of the Boston Red Sox; Mike Breen, who is arguably the longest tenured and most respected guy ever to call games in the NBA. I've been on broadcast teams with Brent Musburger, who is a legendary figure; Dick Vitale, Hall of Fame broadcaster. And I think to a man, every one of those guys would tell you it's really, until you're in television, recognize the number of people doing their jobs correctly and at a high level, how special it can be when you step off the air and you go, okay, you know what? We did a really good job honoring the athletes and coaches whose stories we were supposed to bring the viewer closer to. We were able to do that. Mm-hmm.
Now, you're at an extremely high level now. In fact, ESPN last week announced that they're expanding the package of games that you'll be working this year for the NBA. But you haven't always been at that level. You kind of started from the ground up, just like most people. In fact, from what I remember, you actually got your start as a broadcaster at PC as well.
I did. In fact, I had left coaching in 1992, and I loved my 2 years as an assistant basketball coach at Providence. I absolutely loved it. In fact, there are many days where I miss that. There's something incredibly special about being a part of a team. Everybody's putting in time and work to try to meet the goals that you have set. So I do miss coaching, and maybe the most important thing I miss is the opportunity to influence lives. Well, I forgot where I was going with that, Matt.
But then you quit coaching.
So I leave coaching. And the year I left coaching, because I had played and coached in the program, John Marinato, who was then the athletics director, said, I really think you should try this job. And literally, my career in television, believe it or not, is a happy accident. I had no intention of being a broadcaster. In fact, if you could have seen me as a senior in college, where speaking in any public forum, whether it was a classroom, it didn't matter where, I hated it. I was shy. I had it all going on. Bad hair, bad teeth, bad clothes, you name it. That was me. So the last profession you would have picked for me back then is broadcaster. It's really, always say divine providence has a hand in the small of my back and sort of just pushing me along.
So you started doing PC women's basketball games.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, you kind of took one step at a time. And I love the story about how you were doing color for the games. All of a sudden, the play-by-play.
Yeah. Can't
show up at a game, and here you are stepping in.
Right. It's interesting. That first year, we were on a radio station, very small in Rhode Island, and the gentleman who both owned, operated, was the general manager for, and announcing, he had 1,000 things going on. And I don't recollect the exact reason, but he didn't show one particular night. I don't know. I can't remember if it was weather or whatever the case may be. And I called a Providence College women's game on a phone line by myself, doing play-by-play in color, which I didn't know how to do play-by-play. I knew the game, but I was growing and developing. And you could look at incremental steps all along the way. Shortly thereafter, the Big East started to put their women's games on television. They had their own television network. And so I started in that way. And then, happy accidents. Mike Gorman doesn't show up for a Big East noon basketball game because there was miscommunication. He had another game that day. So I happened to get lucky and call that one. And I can look back and point to several moments. Two other ones really stand out. One, the advent of the WNBA, because for the first time, now consider when that came into play in 1997, I had probably built up my winter game package to about 25 to 30 games a year. Now you add another 32 games that I could do in the summer, and all of a sudden you have 60 plus games. And for the first time ever in the history of sports television, a woman could make a living doing what Dick Vitale and Bill Raftery does, and that's being a color analyst. Never before in the history of sport, regardless of what it is, had a woman been able to make a living as a color analyst. And so that was huge. And then I would say another break was, I don't remember the exact year, maybe 98, 99, the then associate commissioner of the Big East, or of the Atlantic 10, Bob Stites, needed a new color person for his men's package. And this is 1998 or 99. So I want you to think about, Matt, the kind of, I don't want to say courage because it's the wrong word, but the intrepid spirit he must have had to do this, because he was down to 3 analysts. I was on that list. And he called Mike Breen and said, "These are the analysts I'm looking at. Who do you think I should take?" They said, "Well, unequivocally, the best of that group is Doris. But are you prepared to go to your coaches and tell them you're going to put a woman on their color analyst package?" So I have always been indebted to Bob Stites and his willingness to do that, because those two things, I would say, were the two biggest factors in launching my career to where it is now.
Right, but before all of those, you had the point in your career where you're trying to decide what you want to do, right? Mm-hmm. So you talked about how you kind of stumbled into broadcasting.
Yes.
So at what point in that timeline did you decide, all right, this is actually a potential long-term career for me and not just a stopgap situation?
I don't know what your reaction to this will be, or what your listeners' reaction to this will be. There was a lot unfolding in my life at that point. I was married. I had 2 young children, and I didn't really operate except in doing the job that was directly before me. So first and foremost, I was a mom and a wife, and that was my most important job. And I was doing that to the best of my abilities. And then I was working part-time, 3 months in the winter, 3 months in the summer. I don't know that I ever consciously processed where this could take me. I was a working mom trying to be the best I could be at the job that was right before me. And little by little, every single year, honest to God, from that point until this, it has grown incrementally to the point where I am now. And I love that when I see people in arenas or wherever, and they think that this is where I started. Mm-hmm. I remember calling a game at the University of Vermont, and it is a blinding snowstorm. We don't know if we're going to have the technical wherewithal to get this game on. The truck was there, and it was the smallest truck I've ever seen. There were 2 cameras. I didn't have a monitor in the open. I had no video footage. If you're in the normal stand-up open days back in the day, you would be watching video and talking over it. I didn't have any of that. It was me and my play-by-play partner just talking at each other. So it's been an interesting progression. I honest to God, I have been incredibly lucky.
And you mentioned a couple people, Mike Gorman, one of them, Mike Breen, who's the head, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the head play-by-play person for ESPN in terms of their NBA coverage,
no
and
question.
Also works with the Knicks.
Yes, correct.
So at what point in your career, or I should say, to what extent have mentors or people who can serve a mentoring role helped you within your career as you've kind of progressed step by step without really having the 5-year, 10-year plan type mindset to your career?
I think when I look back at some of the people I'm indebted to, I would point to the people at Madison Square Garden Network, because you're talking about, Providence College, and I don't know if it does now, but back then it didn't have a communications major, and I would not have studied that anyway because I wouldn't have thought it possible for me. I had no formal training as it relates to being a basketball commentator. Zero, none. What I did have was passion for the game of basketball, love for the game of basketball, and knowledge about the game. I think it helps that I'm a point guard. But I needed somebody to be patient with me. I needed somebody to let me make my mistakes on the air. I remember the first game I did at Providence College, or one of the very first TV games I did. It was a Providence College women's basketball game. I was filling in for Sherry Levin, who was the Big East announcer at the time. And Matt, honest to God, I did a full open. I never looked at the camera. I was so afraid. I was so afraid of this light that had just lit up on the camera that I looked anywhere but. And I stumbled my way through the game. I made a couple of intelligent points. Then I had to do a post-game, and I was a disaster. But Tommy McElroy, who was then in charge of the broadcast division of the Big East Network, saw something in me. And, you know, you look back and you need people who believe in you, who think you have potential at something, and then are patient. So Tommy McElroy, I always feel indebted to him. MSG Network, which at the time was the leader in regional sports television back then, Madison Square Garden was always the leader. They had the best announcers. They were the first to get high definition before anybody else got it. And there's a gentleman there by the name of Mike McCarthy. And so the second year I'm with the New York Liberty, they gave me the TV package. And Mike McCarthy came to me and said, "We really believe you have unbelievable potential at this, and we want you to know that if Clyde Frazier ever has to miss a game for any reason, which is very rare, we're going to ask you to do it."
And he's working for the Knicks, not the Liberty. Just for people who don't.
That's correct. He was running, so at Madison Square Garden, the television side and the team side are two distinct entities. They operate independently of one another, despite what people might think. And Mike was another person who was willing to take that chance. And, you know, Paula McHale and Howie Singer and Spencer Julian, these are all people who remain at Madison Square Garden Network to this day. They taught me the business. You know, they taught me, you know, how to write an introduction if I was going to set up a feature. Bobby Lewis, who was then the director of the New York Knicks, at times the New York Rangers, he taught me how to use a telestrator, which angle to request from a particular camera. All of that is technical information that if you're not a communications major and don't have on-hand experience during your undergraduate days, you've got to figure out, and you've got to figure it out quick. So,
now, did you reach out to a lot of these people to try to gain some of the knowledge that they had and try to acquire that? Obviously, you're a competitive person. Given your background, you want to do as good of a job as you can, even if you're kind of going step by step in the process. So was it, for some of these people, situations where you're reaching out to colleagues or people who you hope to view as colleagues as you progress? Or are they just in a situation where they're your boss or they're part of your broadcast team and that's just a natural relationship that forms?
Bosses, broadcast team members, you know, coworkers, other broadcasters who might offer an observation or two. So mostly interaction. I'll give you one example of a time where I specifically reached out to announcers. I don't remember the year. Again, they're all sort of running together at this point. But I wanted to be a part of the Women's Final Four. And Ann Myers Drysdale was the color person. So I knew, you know, she's a Hall of Fame basketball player. I wasn't going to be the color analyst. But I went to my bosses and said, "I think I deserve an opportunity. Can I do the sideline?" And remarkably, they said yes. And I thought to myself, okay, now you have the job and you have absolutely no idea how to do that job. So I called two people. I called Al Troutwig, who is longtime MSG Networks guy, but also a longtime NBC Olympics coverage person, and Michelle Tafoya, who arguably has won more Emmys as a sideline reporter than anybody in history. And I said, what do I do? How do I do this? And both took the time and you know, sort of gave me a synopsis of how they go about their business. And Al Troutwig actually, to this day, said something to me that I often tell when I speak in front of college students who are interested in broadcasting, and people who might already be in the business who might have some frustration with that sideline role. I said, you know, what should I know? And he said, well, first and foremost, he said, as a sideline reporter, there will be some nights where you get off the air and you think to yourself, wow, I helped elevate that broadcast. Whatever I added at a particular moment took the broadcast from one level to another. But far more often than that, you're going to get off the air and think to yourself, oh my goodness, they just paid me to do that? Because as a sideline reporter, it's maybe, to me, the hardest job in television. People will be out there listening thinking, no way. As a sideline reporter, you've got to be tuned into so many things. If I'm covering 2 football teams, I got to know 180 guys and their stories. If there's an injury on one sideline and I'm on the other, I've got to sprint from side to side. I've got to be aware of what my broadcast team is saying. I've also had to have read every single newspaper clip on any guy on that team. And oh, by the way, when you do get your chance to speak on that telecast, you better do it in about 30 seconds. And you do it with concise, clear, informative information. And then you get it back before that play starts again, because the viewer does not want to hear a sideline reporter, in my estimation, talking over action. So, the voices you remember for me are the play-by-play. They are the ones who have the iconic moments, the Al Michaels, "Do you believe in miracles" line. And the color analyst, the Chris Collinsworth, who, is so insightful, or Mark Jackson, who adds such flavor to a broadcast. But I would tell you unequivocally, if the sideline job is done correctly, it is harder than you think it is.
That's interesting, because you're right. I think people who have never been in that role, or just casual observers of communication or sports in general, might not see that. They just see the one question and then move on. I was listening to a different podcast that you did recently with Richard Deitch, and you brought up a very interesting point. How you said, please let me know if I'm incorrect here, where say if you're doing a game, you're doing the sideline, and the coaches say down 15 points, and you have time to talk to them, it's one question and out.
Yes.
Because you want it to be the point where you're not taking away from their profession. It's just simply, you're trying to entertain, but you're not trying to take away from the action. So creating that balance, is that just something that comes from experience, or is that something from your basketball days that has helped you contribute to figuring that out?
Yeah, I think you get a feel. And it's interesting because I watch other networks, and they're going to ask the 2 questions, regardless of what the scenario is. And that's totally okay. That's the way they choose to do it. I know that those end-of-quarter interviews in the NBA is a real point of contention with the coaches. They wonder about its value. They're saying, really, you're putting me in this position, and I'm coaching, and I've got my emotions running high. I've got my job is to be coaching the men right in front of me. But here's the reality. The NBA and ESPN, the NBA and TNT are partners to a degree. And ESPN does a ton of research, Matt. They're always doing focus groups. And one of the questions they ask is, what do you think of those interviews? And knowledgeable sports fans will go, those are an absolute waste of time. Those coaches say nothing. But by and large, the viewer wants to see that. In Greg Popovich's case, because they get enjoyment out of seeing that sideline reporter be absolutely tortured. But in other times, they must think it's access and discovery. And so we're trying to take you to a place as a fan that you couldn't get yourself. And the reality is this. The skyrocketing cap has changed the lives of coaches and players alike, and there is that partnership element. And so if ESPN and TNT are telling these coaches this is important, then I think answering 2 questions is not too big a deal. I'm just respectful of, if we're at the conference finals, the finals, a playoff game, whatever the case may be, or even a regular season game, if I'm getting my head handed to me as a coach, I'm going to answer 1 question. And I'll try to tell that coach, hey, I'm just going to give you 1 here. Now,
if you're doing, say, color for the game, I think for a sideline reporter, this isn't as valuable. But if you're doing color for the game, and you're in a situation where you may not agree with a coaching decision, or you may think a strategy within a game is suspect, considering that partnership that you just mentioned, how willing are you in that situation to express your opinion fully, or how much do you throttle back, or making that decision?
You mean it? I would never do that as a sideline. I'd only do it as an analyst, obviously. And so this is an really interesting question. And the most interesting answer I've ever heard given was by Jeff Van Gundy. And he actually, it wasn't in response to a question. He was on our broadcast of an NBA game, and he said, really? he said, at the end of the day, none of us are truly honest. Do I say everything I want to say as a broadcaster? No. Do I go up to the line that I'm comfortable with? Yes, of course I do. For me, it's been an interesting process of growth, okay? Because I've been an analyst for the most part on men's college basketball and now increasingly on the NBA. But I did not play men's college basketball, nor did I coach that, nor did I play or coach in the NBA. So my verbiage, my take is going to be vastly different than Mark or Jeff's, right? Stylistically, I have to be different because they bring experience to that job that I simply can't bring. It doesn't mean I can't do a credible and good job on the games that I call. I believe I do that. I hope that doesn't sound, arrogant. I think I do a very credible job.
I think that's safe to say.
But, I am careful of my verbiage. It is my job at ESPN to offer insight, at times opinion. In fact, ESPN would like to hear me offer my opinion to a greater extent. I just think one thing that I'm incredibly mindful of is I am aware in the 2 years that I coached, and we had 2 very successful years at Providence College women's basketball when I coached. I am incredibly aware of how difficult a job that is. Coaching, I don't care the level, is a 365, 7-day a week. If you care about your job, that's what it is. And there are far more things that go into coaching than what the viewer sees in a 2-hour or 2.5-hour telecast. Believe me, head coaches, regardless of the level, are at one time coach, mentor, parent, counselor, hype man, name it. A coach's job is more difficult than we think it is.
And you're in a situation when you're doing your research or getting to a city early where you can talk with the coaches, whether it's college or pro, where they can shed light on some of their decision-making processes or let you know what's going on with their team, whether it's an injury that's not quite getting reported or something that's going on with a player. So you're in a situation where you know probably what's going on than the audience would.
Yeah.
But however, you're also in a spot where you can't be, I guess, how do you decide how in-depth you want to get with your audience who may not know basketball to the level you do or don't want to hear it spoken about at a granular level that you might talk with a coach? Right.
So you have a couple things in that piece, Matt, and don't let me forget to go back to the piece about what the coaches tell us privately. But how do I decide? One of the things that I think is a philosophical issue for announcers and ESPN. So we do, and it's a little different for college basketball and the NBA in terms of our access. Excuse me. But we would meet with an NBA coach at the arena about an hour and 15 minutes before the game. We get maybe 10 minutes with each head coach. And you're right, there's times where they're telling me something that as a broadcaster, I have to know he meant that for our ears only. Now, I don't know necessarily if ESPN would say everything they tell you is on the record because they know you're an ESPN employee. But to me, everything we do is about relationships. So I'm not going to betray the trust of a coach who might have said something to me that I know is not for public consumption, but is to try to help me greater understand a circumstance. And back to the other part, and forgive me, I kind of answered myself. Do you know that it took me a very long time, and it was Dick Vitale preaching to me over and over and over again. What we do is, to a certain extent, an entertainment medium. When you guys tune in a game at night, are you tuning in to enjoy the game or to be lectured by me about how smart I am about the game of basketball? And for a long time, especially on the men's games I was doing, I always felt like I was proving myself, that somehow I had to convince the viewer that even though I didn't play or coach men's college basketball, that I knew the game. And so it took me a very long time to realize I can enjoy it too. Mm-hmm. I can enjoy it, and the viewer should enjoy it. Certainly I have to deliver the basketball goods when the job requires it. But the reality is, I love the game, and you should feel that as the viewer. And honest to God, 10 years of Dick Vitale saying to me, they're not tuning in to hear how smart you are, Doris. I promise you that.
But at this point, and you mentioned it earlier, you've been a trailblazer in this industry females.
I'm comfortable with that word.
Okay, then I'll say it. You don't have to repeat it. But at the same time, you obviously have reached a point where, as you mentioned, you're at a spot that, in terms of the level of access you have and the amount of airtime that you have, was kind of unequaled when you got there to that level. So I guess my question is there a pressure that comes along with that? Kind of being one of the first people to do it, whether it's an internal pressure or external from others, is there more pressure associated in being in that role?
I've never looked at it that way. The one thing I have kept in the back of my mind, as I've been fortunate enough to call some of the games I call, is there's going to be a woman that comes after me, and I would like to make her path a little bit easier. And I'll tell you the reason I'm uncomfortable with the word trailblazer, and I'm going to have to be careful with the verbiage because I can't give it to you straight, the way this woman had to endure it. There were many women who came before me in sports television. You think about Robin Roberts, but the person I'm going to talk about is Susan Waldman, current New York Yankees broadcaster. And she tells a story about being in a Toronto Blue Jays locker room. And this is years ago. This is when she's first starting out. And game ends. There's the usual media scrum. There's 15 to 20 guys and Susan around the star player in the locker room. And this gentleman makes her uncomfortable, kind of disrobes the whole bit. And then as someone asks a question, he says to the group, "I'm not answering another question until that C word leaves the locker room." And Susan says that was probably the last straw for her. She said, "This is it. I cannot endure this kind of treatment any longer. I can't do it." And literally, as she's thinking that thought, another professional baseball player, and I've always regretted not remembering who this person was, another professional baseball player called to her from across the room and said, "Young lady, if you would like to talk to a professional baseball player, I'd be happy to answer any question you have." So I've not been exposed to any of that, Matt. I've been really lucky. The soft landing spot for me in my career has always been the players and coaches. Once the conversation has turned to basketball, gender goes out the window. I think they see me as a basketball person. And so, do I feel pressure? No, I know this. I know the woman who comes behind me is going to probably advance further than I do. And that's the correct way, right? We should always be striving and getting to places where we haven't been before. I don't want to screw up that young person's path. I'd like them to walk into a gym and have somebody go, "Well, we respect her because the one who came before her was hardworking, she was professional, she was prepared, and that's what I view my job to be."
Right. You mentioned something interesting as well with with Dick Vitale said, they're not necessarily there to hear you or to see you, depending on the medium, which is kind of funny coming from him, who was one of the most entertaining broadcasters in history.
Right.
But at the same time, you're in a very public profession. So you have a situation where the game might not be about you. However, your career is you're a very public facing person. So is there a situation where you have to balance not being above the game, but also branding yourself in a way that makes you marketable?
It's an interesting question. I hear athletes talk about brand all the time. You know what the best description of brand is? And I heard Gino Auriemma say this past year, brand. You know what brand is? Brand is your game. Like, how good am I as an analyst? How good was I as a basketball player? That's your brand. If you take care of your job, you can be okay. Your brand is going to be fine. What's an interesting question for me in this day and age of sports television is, increasingly it seems to me, Matt, that you've got to be an opinion maker. That the more outlandish thing that you say, regardless of whether you're accurate or inaccurate, it seems like the loudest talker saying the most outlandish things seem to be advancing. And so you make a conscious choice, what is your comfort zone as a broadcaster? Who do you fundamentally want to be? And is that in line with your employer's view of who they want you to be? And obviously, if those two things don't meet, you're probably not going to be employed much longer, is my guess. It's just, I think that my business is changing at light speed, and it's changing in many respects, the one I just noted. The other part that's interesting is this next generation, my children's generation, and my kids are 24 and 22, they consume media drastically different than my generation. If I come home at night and I want to watch a game, I click on the cable set, right? That's what I do. I click on my television. They don't. They stream. And so companies like ESPN in particular, as cord cutters are now increasing, 812,000 people cut the cord in the last quarter alone. Think about that. That translates to $50 million lost by ESPN because $6 of everybody's cable bill goes directly to ESPN. So ESPN now has to figure out, okay, one, how do we monetize the streaming aspect of our business? And what's the next iteration? Cable television in general. This is not an ESPN problem. This is a cable television issue where what's the future? Is it a la carte? And then you get the more, the smaller issues, or I guess, to a lesser degree, the micro issues of, okay, how are we handling the broadcast? What's our philosophy there? There's just a lot going on in sports television right now. Right.
And you have some people who have been in sports television, basketball or otherwise, who have made the transition to the front offices. Mm-hmm. So you look at the Golden State Warriors, you see Steve Kerr, who is a 6-time NBA world champion, moves into the broadcast booth, that comes back, works for the Phoenix Suns as their GM, goes back into the booth, and then becomes the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. So has that ever piqued your interest, doing something along those lines?
It's interesting. I've always thought at some point I would go back to coaching. I miss coaching. I only did it for 2 years, but it was an incredibly enjoyable experience. I left because I wanted to get married and have kids, and I didn't think I could do both of those things incredibly well because coaching is so demanding. Has it ever crossed my mind about the NBA? Not necessarily. That's an 82-game schedule. It's a little bit of a grind. Certainly there are more and more opportunities, and that excites me for the women who are now have a desire to enter into that field, because I think you're going to see more and more of it thanks to the success of women like Becky Hammon. I'll be honest with you. I am still taking my career one day at a time. I've got 2 years left on this deal. I'm calling the games in front of me and making my decisions as I go.
See, I feel like that's a very unique perspective, especially now where you have so many people who are very vocal about what they hope to accomplish, or even you see some people who advise not just student athletes, but just college students in general to be very intentional about their career goals. Mm-hmm. So has that always been, have you had to think kind of like a metacognition piece where you're saying, all right, I have to be this way? Mm-hmm. Or is it just more natural? And I guess a second part to that is, do you think that's contributed to your success, being so kind of brick by brick to build the wall?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's been crucial to my success. And I'm not telling you that I'm not... Listen, by the information I just gave you, I made it very clear that I'm paying attention to the changes within my industry. I'm listening to the things that my bosses are requesting of me. But I think, and this is advice I give broadcasters, young people who want to be broadcasters, do not ever waste energy on the jobs you didn't get. You can drive yourself absolutely mad thinking, well, why did she or he get that job and I didn't? You should be paying attention. You should perhaps be considering, were there things that distinguish that individual that perhaps I did not offer? I'm not saying that you're living in a box and not paying attention. What I am saying is you have to pour every ounce of energy into the job that you do have and then see where the chips fall. If I'll tell you the truth, I have already considered what's next for me. That's the truth. I'm considering it now. Do I want to teach at the college level? Do I want to coach? Do I want to teach and coach in the high school level, which is something I thought I would do when I left Providence College? I'm sort of always thinking of that next iteration. However, my primary focus is on the job right in front of me.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting to know, and I'm sure we're all going to stay, keep abreast of what you might be doing in the near and long term. If you don't mind, I'd love to go through some quick questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. You mentioned earlier you're a point guard at heart and with experience. So generally speaking, men's and women's, who are your top 5 point guards that you enjoyed watching?
Okay, well, I'd say with the best point guard right now in the NBA would be Chris Paul. I mean, he gives a master class on the position every night. The ball's on a string. He makes every right read in the pick and roll situations. He's one of my favorite. I look at a person like Diana Taurasi. She's not a pure point guard. She's more of a combo guard. But to me, when I list my all-time favorite players, she is always there, and she's the only member of the distaff side on that list because she's the greatest winner and just played with this, I don't know, panache and just incredible passion and love for the game. And she's the best women's player I've ever seen, so I'd put her on the list of point guards because I think she could run a master class. Oh boy, you know who I really enjoyed in his prime was Deron Williams. Deron Williams was the most physically punishing guard in the NBA for like a 3 to 4 year stretch. Mm-hmm. And there were long questions about who would be better, Chris Paul or Deron Williams. I remember when I was watching basketball in my formative years, I loved watching Nate Archibald. Lefty and just pure and then I also remember being a 76ers fan. I obviously grew up on the Jersey Shore, not too far from Philly, and Mo was helping the Sixers win that title with Dr. J. And so I won't say top 5 like in terms of who I think is the best. What I will say is those are the people I enjoyed watching.
Okay, that sounds good. Talking about point guards, what do you see for Kris Dunn's NBA future?
Well, I don't think Kris could have asked to land in a better circumstance. You're talking about an organization that has got incredibly young, really talented pieces. Karl Anthony Towns proved a year ago that he is a big-time player. Zach LaVine, I mean, they are stacked with talent. And I think the other important piece of that is if there's any coach in the NBA who can teach good habits, it's Tom Thibodeau. And if there's any coach in the NBA whose defensive concepts help Kris Dunn find success and find it early, it's Tom Thibodeau. I mean, you're talking about a long, lanky, incredibly skilled defensive player in Kris Dunn, and I think he's going to be well served by having Tom. Right.
Like I said, he's built such a long career as a coach, Tom Thibodeau, in terms of the defensive side mm-hmm. of the ball. Mm-hmm. For those who don't know him, he was a assistant coach for a long time. Not a long time, but with the Celtics.
Yeah, when they're 19 years, I think he was an assistant coach to Jeff Van Gundy first. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, and then moved on with the Bulls, and now he's with the Timberwolves, as you said. All right, top pro arena to watch a game.
Wow. Okay, so the 2 loudest arenas that I can remember are Oklahoma City and then Golden State. Those arenas are deafening. You cannot hear yourself think in either one.
Okay, and our best NCAA arena. Excluding the dunk. I know we're partial. This is the PC podcast.
Right, correct. I'm not going to put the dunk. I'm going to say Cameron Indoor Stadium. With a very close second would be Allen Fieldhouse. When Allen Fieldhouse is rocking, that building feels like it's moving. But keep in mind, I've spent an awful lot of time in the ACC and have witnessed firsthand the effect of the Cameron crazies on opponents. So I would say Cameron Indoor.
So Cameron Indoor is at Duke. Allen Fieldhouse is University of Kansas, or is that Kansas University? All right, 2 more.
No problem.
Best food in Providence. Mm-hmm. If you're going anywhere to eat, where would it be?
Oh boy, I mean, there are so many great choices. It depends on what I'm in the mood for. I'll tell you one that I think is, I don't know how many people know about it, Los Andes.
Oh, yeah.
It's an outstanding place. If I'm going to go, I want a gyro, I'm going to Eastside Pockets. The best hummus in the state. It's not close. If I'm down here in South County, I'm not saying Providence, South County, you have to go to the Matunic Oyster Bar.
Oh,
it is absolutely, positively the best. And the best part about it is only like 15 minutes from my house, if that. But I Pane Vino. You know what one of my favorite things to do when I'm absolutely exhausted and I think I land off a flight? There is no possible way, and I love to cook. I absolutely love to cook. But if I'm drop dead exhausted, I am going to Venda Ravioli. I'm going to sit and have lunch because it's always delicious. And then I'm going through that shop and I'm picking up any number of delicious Italian things. And then I might stop by Gasparo's, not because he's a PC guy, but because his wine selection is exceptional.
Or both.
Or both. Or both.
And you mentioned Jeff Van Gundy a bunch of times. Jeff Van Gundy, former Friar coach back in the mid-'80s as well. Last one, best PC memory.
Oh, boy. Probably winning the Big East regular season championship. My junior season, absolutely special thing to work hard, win, set a goal. and meet that goal. And then that helped us get to the NCAA tournament that year. So definitely.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Doris, for doing this and welcoming us into your home and everything you do for Providence College.
My pleasure. I love Providence. I'll always be a Friar.
All right. Go Friars.